Okay, good evening, everyone. How are you today? We are very lucky to have such illustrious panelists with us today. We are continuing the celebration of ITM's 20th anniversary. This is the second Talking Trade at the FIT guest lecture series this season. We've had 54 successful seasons and over 200 speakers. And so we're continuing on with this tradition. And the topic for today is marketing and licensing in Latin America. First of all, I'd like to thank the ITM faculty, Professor Pat Yanes, who will be moderating the event, Professor Guillermo Jimenez and Professor Larry Delson, who brought their classes, and Professor Shireen Musa, who brought our volunteers for today. If our volunteers can stand up. Okay, we have 6 volunteers. So if you saw 4 there, just have a double vision. Okay, so now we also have an online audience, and the online audience can also ask questions. It's interactive. So if you speak, kindly speak into the mic, because that's the only way they're going to hear us. And so I'm now very proud to present to you Professor Patrick Yanes.
Thank you. Good evening. It's good to see you. And I'm glad that you made time to be with us today, Karina, Ximena, Sylvia. We have a very nice group representing some countries of Latin America, Peru and Colombia. And we have also someone from one of my favorite fashion brands, Tommy, and also from one of my favorite companies, PVH, for many reasons, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So what we will do is I'm going to ask a few questions to them, and then we'll open it for questions and answers. And as a brief introduction, let me see if I can do this here. I'd like to just frame a little bit the issue of what we'll be talking about. And of course, all of you have taken IN 312, Introduction to International Trade. So we have learned the difference between Latin America, South America, Central America. We spent a few chapters going through geography and history and business and some cultural aspects that are important in international trade. So this is just to remind you that when we talk about Latin America, we are talking about the 21 countries south of the United States. And Latin America is really a linguistic term. It refers to countries that speak Romance languages, and mostly Spanish and Portuguese. So we are talking about an area that together is around 600 million people. And that's probably twice as many people than in the United States. And the economy is probably about 1/3 of the United States. So while the population is double, the economy is about 1/3 of the size of our country here in the United States. What is interesting about Latin America is the strength of the middle class. Is growing very quickly, and it is projected that it will continue to grow very quickly. I mean, we expect that in the next 10 years, between now and 2025, probably a good 200 million people will move from the ranks of low-income households to middle-income households. So that is important to us in the industry, because as people move to the middle class, they have a stronger tendency to move from purchasing unbranded clothing to branded clothing. And branded clothing is fashion. And that is one of the topics we'll be talking about today. Another interesting aspect is luxury markets. As you can see from this slide here, around 10,000 people in Latin American countries now qualify as wealthy. And a label of wealthy in this context means that they own assets of at least $30 million. So these are the people that are looking at high-end fashion brands, and they're also looking at luxury brands. So for all these reasons, then, it's important to keep an eye on this land. These are aggregates, but when you look at the countries individually in Latin America, it's amazing to see the similarities among them. Here you only have about half of the Latin American countries, and one of the most important similarities is probably the fact that they were all colonized by Spain mostly and Portugal, so they have that linguistic commonality. They began as very strong Catholic countries, but with time now that is changing. Other churches, Protestant churches, and the Mormons are there as well, advancing very rapidly. But what is more striking to me as a person who was born in this continent are the differences among the individual countries. When you look closely, you can see that they are very large countries. Brazil, in terms of population, Brazil, 200 million people. That is 2/3 of the size of the United States. And Mexico, 100 million people. That is 1/3 of the United States. So combined, they are equal to the population of the United States. But then you have countries that are very small. If you look there, you can find Uruguay with a population of 3 million people. That is the borough where I live now, Brooklyn. Brooklyn has more people than Uruguay. So in terms of population, there is a great diversity. That for us, being a marketing department, translate into market size. And that's why we're talking about population, because these numbers then mean the number of consumers that are in these markets. Another diversity that is interesting to me is the income power that these different countries have. So if you look at the GDP nominal, that gives you a sense of the value of the annual produce of the country. But being a marketing person, to me, more important is GDP per capita, because that number can be correlated with purchases by the middle class. So when we look at that, what is interesting is that the highest GDP per capita countries are Chile, with $24,000 plus per person, Argentina, and Uruguay. And none of those countries figure in the list of most populated country, and yet when it comes to GDP per capita, that's when they show up. And when you talk to people who sell luxury brands, they will tell you that the reason why they are there is because these three countries have already reached and passed that 20,000 benchmark, which makes them be potential places for luxury markets, luxury brands permanently. So that's another difference that I would make when I'm looking, that I would identify when I'm looking at them. And from a social point of view, which has some relevance to fashion and fashion studies also, is the changes in social attitudes about things that were very ingrained in the societies over time. Being predominantly Catholic countries, I'm usually amazed when I hear that some of these countries have decriminalized drugs, for instance, and people no longer get arrested for having marijuana or other drugs for personal use. That's a major change from the time that I was there. And also, some of these countries are beginning to consider now same-sex marriage. In fact, one of them has already approved that. So in a period of 20 years, this is a major social change. And we have to keep an eye then on the evolution of fashion with all these changes, because somehow I think that they come together. Marketing again, in 2014, in Latin America, 21 countries, we sold $105 billion in apparel and $49 billion in footwear. So it's roughly an area that sells about $150 billion a year. It's a good market. It could be bigger, and it will be bigger, and it's growing. If you do the percentages in terms of the world right now, world sales, this is roughly about 10% of world sales. So there's a lot of promise in there. Since I live here, I always like to compare things with the United States. This is us here in 2014, 300 billion in apparel, 70 billion in footwear, roughly $370 billion sales in apparel. So we can say that it's roughly about 40 to 45%. Latin America is 40 to 45% of the United States. Of course, we are one country. We're talking about 21 Latin American countries. What is interesting also is the strength of this apparel and footwear market over time. It's not a one-time thing. So when you look back, let's say we go back to 2008, we can see year after year a solid growth. Even when you take into account the big recession of 2008, 2009, there was a dip there, but it recovered immediately the year after. And you can see the strength of the growth year after year. So that's the promising part, that fashion brands can keep an eye on it and then make strategic decisions about why to be there and how to be there. I like to also look at the specific countries' sales, retail sales of apparel and footwear. And what is interesting is that the top three countries, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, account for over 70%, almost 70% of the sales in the region. That's how big those three top countries are. And then you have everyone else. Since all of us here are trade people, international trade people, this is another footnote that I like to make about Latin America and its trade relation with the United States. We Americans are very protective of our textiles industries. And we don't want to make any trade agreements with anybody who does not buy our textiles, our fibers, our fabric. But in the process of creating partnerships, we have to allow them to sell their yarns and fabrics. So we have these agreements with them, and where we set the rules of origin. And when you look at the major bilateral trade agreements, such as Peru, Colombia, Panama, and Chile, and then the regional trade agreements, NAFTA and CAFTA, in all of them, we have required that we have yarn forward rules of origin, which is good for the United States. But my comment is that this has been very good as well for these Latin American countries, because we can see that since these agreements were put in place, that the local textile industries have gradually begun to take advantage of these rules of origin that allows them to use their own textiles. So over time, we're seeing that they are producing more yarns, they're producing more fabric. So it's not just that they are buying more from the United States. And what is good about that is that that is the beginning of the supply chain. Not the very beginning, because the very beginning is cotton, actually, but it's very close to the beginning. And when you look at the supply chain as a whole, having a very strong base in the production of yarns and fabrics, it kinds of creates a dynamism towards the higher parts of the supply chain. So This is good news then, and probably only trade people can appreciate, this link between rules of origin and our trade agreements with the region. Finally, one thing that for us in the industry, when we look at Latin America as a fashion market, we cannot ignore the portal, the entry to those markets, and that is Panama. And I'm glad that we have Karina here today because PVH and Tommy and Calvin, they were the first one to understand the importance of Panama as a distribution entry to Latin America for many reasons. And I don't know if among you here are students who traveled with me to Panama a few years ago, and we got to see their distribution center and the Colón Free Trade Zone and all the showrooms that they have done there. It's very impressive. And because of geopolitics, for many Latin American people, it's much easier to go shopping to Panama than coming to New York City or Miami, because Panama, unlike us here in the United States, Panama doesn't ask Latin Americans to have a visa to enter Panama. So it's free entry for Latin Americans. They use dollars. English is very common. It's a small country, but it's very friendly, and it has the best that any Latin American country can offer. So I hope that Karina talks a little bit about that when we talk about licensing. And finally, since one of part of the title of this event is licensing, this is an example of a best case of licensing that I know in Latin America, and it's PVH, the parent company. I'm familiar with Tommy, I'm familiar with Calvin. And what they did is something very smart. They looked for a local Latin American company that had experience in retailing, in distribution, and they found it in the ASW group that has different affiliates. And here I'm giving you two examples. So through these two local companies in Panama, Tommy and Calvin and PVH in general distribute all its goods down Latin America. So again, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that. So I think that that's enough then to, as a brief introduction to what we are going to be addressing today. So what we will do is I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. There is a very good biography for each of you in the program today. So in addition to that, you tell us a little bit about your current projects and your organizations as well. Karina?
Sure. Yep. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Professor Yanez and Professor Pomerantz for having me. This is a new opportunity for me, so I'm excited to speak to all of you a little bit about my role and also licensing in Latin America. So I did want to start, and I don't know if the video is queued up or not, with just giving a little bit of background about Tommy Hilfiger. I'm sure some of you, or most of you, have probably heard of the brand, of course, but not necessarily know where we are as a brand today. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, so the brand has been around a long time and has gone through a number of iterations and reinventions. When you've been around that long, you really do have to stay current and come up with new and interesting ways to communicate your brand. So since its debut in 1985, Tommy Hilfiger is now a $6.4 billion company. And it certainly didn't happen overnight. And through a lot of our strategic partnerships, like the one that Professor Yanez mentioned, that's just one small piece of the puzzle. The brand has grown from just men's and women's sportswear to denim, different licensed products, accessories, fragrances, home furnishings, and I could probably go on for 20 minutes about all the products we have now. But truly a global brand that runs across many, many different product categories. So just some stats on the brand. So we operate in 90 countries now. We have 4 collections per year. We have over 1,400 retail stores. Some of those are directly operated, some are through distributors, some are through franchise partners. We have 40 showroom locations, over 17,000 associates now worldwide, 9 divisions of products in-house, and 8 regional licensees, over 10,000 wholesale points of sale throughout the world, and 28 e-commerce stores now. So those are Tommy.com sites that are individually operated in different countries. And since we're here to talk about licensing, I thought I would highlight our top 10 licensing partnerships. So these are our largest. We have more than this, but I thought I would just highlight. And some of these are regional and some of these are product licenses, which I'll get into a little bit more in a moment. But so this ranges, so China at the moment is our number one. It's the fastest growing for a lot of obvious reasons. American Sportswear, which is our Latin America licensee that Professor Yanez touched upon, they happen to be our second largest licensee partnership at the moment. And then we get into some of our products. Watches, we partner with Movado. Footwear, we partner with Mark Fisher Footwear. Tailored clothing, we partner with Marcraft. Estee Lauder does our fragrances. Fishman Tobin does our kids wear. Mexico is another strategic partnership for us. India as well. And then Safilo, to round out our top 10, is our eyewear licensee. Going into my background a little bit, I have been in fashion licensing my entire career. And I think my first job I kind of just fell into, didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I was extremely fortunate in that the minute I got into it, I realized that, hey, there's nothing simple about licensing your brand. And I was hooked because I was like, there's just so many different facets to this business. And it really all comes down to in licensing is forging strategic relationships and really the art of negotiation. So my experience covers both regional licensing and product licensing. So regional licensing is when you, as Professor Yanez touched on, is you identify a partner who, with the expertise in the market to be able to execute on your behalf because they are familiar with all the local nuances and they have all the local relationships. So they can take your brand to the next level, something that most companies cannot do directly. And if they do, the ones that try usually fail. So over time, that's been proven. And you can actually see that if you ever have the opportunity to travel to these markets, you will see the brands that stand out, and there are ones that are noticeably absent. Big global brands like Tommy Hilfiger that are noticeably absent from certain marketplaces because they decided either to go direct and it didn't work out, or they just haven't been able to find the right partner. Product licensing is, as I touched on in some of these top 10, is really how you identify a partner with a expertise in a particular product category. So for us to manufacture watches ourselves, which again, I think it would be a disaster. So we look for partners who have that core competency to manufacture those products, but under very, very close supervision. And I think the key to licensing is not just signing a contract and letting people do what they want with your brand. It has to be with a very specific guidelines and parameters to make sure that execution is happening to the level that you want. So going back to Latin America, in my experience, relationships are everything. It's important to find the right partners that are experienced and trustworthy and financially stable. And I emphasize that last one because the marketplace is very, very volatile. Latin America holds a lot of risk, inherent risk, a lot of political instability, a lot of economic instability, and our partners in these regions really know how to navigate through that. And it's, for a company like PVH to allow the financial risk to sit with a partner is a much more sound way to operate the business than to try to do that ourselves and more than likely lose a fortune. So it's been a very successful business model for us, and I'm happy to say we have some amazing partners. We have now over 250 stores for Tommy Hilfiger in the region, which is pretty amazing considering 30 years ago there was nothing, and even 10 years ago I would say we were one of the only brands present in the market. So it was the brand itself was a pioneer in this part of the world. Most brands were using Latin America to dump excess goods, clean out their inventory, kind of just like it didn't exist. And then about 10 years ago, I think a lot of brands and companies started to realize there's a real market here, as Professor Yanez touched upon, in terms of the buying power of and the emerging middle class. There was a real opportunity there. So now, when you go to these countries, you see a tremendous influx of new brands coming in. Every time I travel to the market, there's somebody new that has turned up. So.
Hi, good evening. Thank you everyone for having me. My name is Ximena de Peralta. I'm editor-in-chief of Cosas Moda, a fashion magazine in Peru, actually the first fashion magazine that was actually made and produced in Peru. We started about 8 years ago as a part of an editorial group, sort of, it's called Grupo Cosas, but think about it as a very small Condé Nast. And they were starting to expand about 8 years ago into more products and creating content. They had their feature magazine, the main one, which is sort of, or they like to think that it's a sort of Vanity Fair. And one of, well, my boss, which is actually a good friend of mine, she came back from college in London and proposed the idea of starting a fashion magazine. And quite frankly, we didn't know what we were doing. I was a copy editor in the publishing house. By then, I had just finished college, and I went there for linguistics and Latin American literature, and I really didn't want to do that for the rest of my career. So I traveled a bit, I didn't know what to do, and they offered me this job, so I took it while I figured out what was next. And while I was a copy editor for the publishing house, the fashion magazine presented itself, and we had no talent. I could write. I knew fashion because it was a personal interest of mine, but not really because I got any formal education in it. And the founder of the magazine asked me to write for it, and that's how it started. And we started working on it. We were playing magazine, quite frankly. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have photographers, not fashion photographers. There wasn't a fashion industry in Latin America back then. Like Karina said, brands were starting to get into the market, but it was still very small. We couldn't find writers, we couldn't find models, we couldn't find photographers. So it was about really partnering with the designers who were mostly independent, the local designers, and really creating the talent and the expertise it takes to publish a fashion magazine. 8 years later, we're still at it. It's not a process that's been complete by any means. It's much better now. We find the talent we need. We find designers eager to participate and be a part of the fashion industry, and we have international brands now, but it's still an ongoing process and it will keep growing. Thanks largely to the numbers Pat showed us in the introduction. And that's it. I think our publishing house right now has 16 magazines, and one of their biggest businesses right now is actually creating content and products, editorial products for clients. I used to be editor-in-chief of 5 different magazines, actually. I'm doing just the fashion one right now. That's the lack of talent we had. There was no one to do that job. No one who actually knew how to do it, and I learned on the go. Now I only do the fashion magazine. Right now, I've been in New York for the past year. I'm a student now here at FIT in the Global Fashion Management program, because I thought it was time to actually get a formal education in fashion so I can help move this train forward.
Thank you, Patrick and Christine, for the invitation and for you to be here very late. And my partners here in the panel. My show of the view is different. It's from Colombia. I'm the apparel sourcing manager for Colombia in North America, what it means is we are like a non-profit sourcing agency for the industry, or we are the right-hand side of the Ministry of Foreign Trade for promoting business in Colombia with the different markets, in this case with the United States. And as Patrick was saying, having a short view of the market and trade, different stages of trade agreements have been done in all the years. But depending on the competitive advantage of a country, you have different advantages from a fashion point of view. If the supply chain, for example, in Peru is very strong in cotton and all the cotton have been there, so you have to know a lot about your geography, your history, and also your competitive advantage to be able to see where your sourcing partners, in the case, for example, of Tommy Hilfiger, trying to adding up what we are speaking here. Not only is offering a way to supply, a way to produce, but also finding the right partner to do that business. So for example, the PVH Group and Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, all the brands that are now under PVH, but especially Tommy is the case, the top case that I think is showing success in licensing and branding. Is also looking for strategic partners in the different regions that show them that they can continue and grow their brand identity and that they have the right partner in the right different supply chain. So going back to who we are, Procolumbia is the promotion entity, and we work directly with the department stores, the private brands, all the channels of distribution of the industry to help them find the right vendors in all the supply chain, from the yarn to the finished product, from the children's wear to the designer, and from the fabric mill to the yarn producer. So we have to be involved in the whole part of the business, not only from knowing technically the production side, knowing technically the trade agreements and the opportunities, but doing the due diligence. As I work here with my team, we have to be able to sell to the right match in a private brand for the main mill in Colombia that can produce 1 million units a month. Also, we have to do the right match for the children's wear that needs to buy for 2 different boutiques in Atlanta. So going that big overview, and we can go over and over. Also, you have to see openly the market, and we were speaking before with my partners here in the panel. The opportunities are always 2 ways. And in the case of Colombia, as an example of Latin America, and I think it's part of a good opening here, you not only have to see Colombia and maybe Latin America or the Americas as one side, supply side, but also as a market that is growing, as a partner, because it's always a 2-way street. You have a possible producer that is going to be your distributor, your partner in your license program, but also it's a good market that is growing. For example, in the case of Colombia, you have 50% of the middle classes is the population has 50% is middle class right now. 10 years ago, it was less than 30%. As you saw in Patrick numbers, the income per capita is more than $14,000, and going to garments, you have like 17 garments. The 17 garments per capita are purchased in Colombia versus 42 in the United States. Those numbers are interesting. That's part of giving from the Institute of Fashion and Exports in Colombia. I can afterwards give you that information, but it means that the income per capita and the absorption, as the economists say, is growing in Latin America, and that you have a big opening as a market in terms of how to consolidate your brands down there. Also, you have to know the expertise, retailing and branding for example, Brazil or maybe Peru and Chile in different sectors, because each of the market has different categories and different strengths. You have to know those strengths. You have to know also the idiosyncrasy of your customer. The customer in Latin America has been growing with hubs of distribution. So for example, Colombia has been a good first example of retailing for fashion Latin brands that have been successful going to the surrounding region. So we have examples of partners not only for Tommy but also for other Latin American brands that grow a lot in Latin America, then went to Europe, and then to the United States. So it's important to know a good partner. Latin American brands are doing the crossover in the United States as well. And a lot of brands are looking at, into doing joint ventures, not only to approach the US market with the typical customer and the typical type of niches in their brand, but also they want to have that high income in the United States Latin American market, because it's going to grow more than I think it's near 100 million people consider Latin American the Latin American population in the United States that has more than fourth generation income in the United States. So that's also an important market that if it has been successful in branding in Latin America, you will catch another size of the market within the United States. My background?
No, let me do that
Okay.
in a second here. Yeah, this is very interesting that we have in these panels someone representing the private sector, someone representing the publishing industry, and someone representing export promotion marketing. All of those areas are ITM courses. I don't know if you have noticed that. And if we look at this panel from another point of view, we have the 4 Ps right here, right now. We have product, pricing, promotion, and place. You know, so whichever way we slice this panel, we're going to get a lot of them tonight. So I want to shift a little bit the conversation now from markets to fashion brands in Latin America. You know, and I'm curious about what each of you can tell about, from your point of view, what works in fashion brands? What are the challenges for local fashion brands and American fashion brands trying to enter the market over there? And I guess Karina can talk from a point of view of Tommy, but then Ximena can talk from the point of view of Peru, and Sylvia from Colombia's point of view as well. You know, so let's focus a little bit about the product, the fashion brand right now.
Well, as Sylvia touched on, I mean, there is a very, very strong local presence, and I think of local brands, and I think that really originated from how difficult it was to import products into some of these countries. And she can probably get into this more than me, but the import requirements in a lot of these countries are pretty onerous, and you know, we over the course of time have and with the help of our partners in these markets have figured it out, but between documents and labels and this and that and you know, quotas, and there's just so many different things you have to be aware of, and once you figure that out, you can get your brand in there. But because what hasn't been so simple, and every country is different, so it's not like you put one label in and it's good for every country. You have to have probably 15 different labels, one for each country, in their language, in the, you know, with the importer details, etc. So this, I think, was the reason why a lot of the local brands became as strong as they are. They are not you know, simple brands. They are very fashionable brands, very not only inexpensive, but they're very expensive local brands as well. Real designers. Some of those designers actually show here in New York Fashion Week nowadays, especially some of the ones from Brazil. But it is very, very strong local competition. So as an international brand going into these markets, you're not just thinking about, in the case of Tommy Hilfiger, I'm not just thinking about like Polo Ralph Lauren and Nautica, you know, and Michael Kors. I'm more worried about, you know, who's on the ground there and who really has the expertise there. And really, when I'm looking at a market and saying, well, where do I need to be positioned as a brand? Who do I want to benchmark myself against? I'm not looking at necessarily at the other international brands. I'm looking at what's happening at the local level. So it's really, you know, interesting when you start digging in and looking at those local brands, because you want to make sure that the target consumer that you're going after is, you know, appreciating what you're bringing to the table. You have to differentiate yourself. You have to have a compelling story to your brand. You can't just, you know, open your doors and expect people to show up. So there is a lot of, you know, marketing and communication and social media and a lot of things that we do around communicating our brand to this consumer that, you know, we're here, what we stand for, the products that we have to offer, and I think that's been a lot of the success that we've experienced. Aside from that, we did enter the market 30 years ago, so, and now we are present in over 30 countries, including the Caribbean, some of the Caribbean islands. So that, I think the brand recognition and awareness in some countries like Mexico, I think we have an over 90% brand awareness, unaided brand awareness, which is really, really high. It's not even that high in the United States or Europe. So it's a very, you know, it speaks a lot to the job that our licensing partners have done, the investments they've made in the brand, not only in opening retail stores, which is a very a huge investment, but also in, as I mentioned, how they market and communicate the brand.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges for US brands or international brands in general to enter the Latin American market, and I'm gonna speak specifically about Peru because I think one of the mistakes that international brands make is precisely thinking that all Latin American countries behave the same way when it's not true. And understanding those nuances is what will determine sometimes their success or their failure in the market. So again, I'm speaking from Peruvian experience here. And I think one of the greatest challenges, and it's something that I've covered a lot in my program and in my studies at FIT too, is the fact that international brands have a very hard time understanding that the Peruvian market still operates under a very strong class system. A brand positioning is essential to enter the market and to develop your brand, because it will never happen like it happens in Europe or the US, that someone will wear a t-shirt from Target with a Chanel handbag. That is just not, it's impossible. It would never, like,
Maybe
they
in 10
wouldn't
years.
be caught dead with a Target t-shirt, which, it's fine, it's a t-shirt. Everyone does the exact same one. But it's a matter of pride, it's a matter of a very old class system that comes from the Spanish colonization. It's in people's blood. It's not going anywhere, even though we tend to believe that we are evolving into being more open-minded, which we are, but not in that aspect. So the brand positioning, I think, where you place your brand in the market will be fundamental for it to succeed or not to. People always make the mistake of assuming that it can cross categories and it will never do, not at least in Peru. And that's all something I've always found fascinating about how international brands have a hard time. They have so much experience and so much business savvy, but these little sociological tidbits sometimes confuse them. They don't really get them. And on the other hand, Peruvians are really not great at building brands, at least apparel brands. Other things, food, we amazing. But apparel brands, not really. And that's largely due to the fact that for a long time, especially during the 80s and early 90s, when we were having a really hard time with hyperinflation and domestic terrorism, no one really wanted to use anything Peruvian. It was a stigma. You weren't a fashion person if you wore a Peruvian brand. So the few brands that we actually had disappeared. And 10 years ago, international brands started coming. We had like nondescript brands, but nothing particularly iconic or alluring. And we've always been great at manufacturing and at textile traditions, but at building brands, not so much. People who try to do it now, who are mostly, or who mostly started as independent designers, what they find the hardest is actually getting the resources to build a brand. The expertise, we're not there yet. As I said, we've come a long way, but people really still don't understand that fashion is a business and you have to treat it as such. You're not just playing dress up, it's much more complex, and we still don't have the business talent to handle that.
And in the case of Colombia, and also responding to Patrick's question about analyzing the market, the marketing, and also the trade about it, the production side. Colombia has been a long-standing market with, initially it was more closed than from 91 to now. It was more open to the markets, but has been vertically integrated since the 1900s with yarn and mills and accessories and a very sophisticated internal market since the beginning. That has to be known, and I have heard, and I think that stick with me also from one of the corporate directors of a major brand. In fact, I think it was from PVH, that he says, think global, act local. And that's how you are successful in a brand in the United States, in Europe, or in Latin America. In Colombia, you have you had before very detailed retail stores and some specialty stores in the big cities when we have a lot of difference between income distribution. Right now, the middle class has grown, as I told you, 50% of the population is considered middle class, and previously we had like the 4 main cities where the retailers were setting up. Right now, the second cities, there are like 6 or 7 cities, middle-sized cities, that are growing more than 35%. So those cities are the sizes of the market where the population is consuming more. And that sophisticated part of the domestic market is still there. So we are competing with the retailers coming from all over the world. But we also had, since the beginning, a lot of European brands. So we have a luxury market that is initially was in the center and in the coast, and it's related to the cultural issue as you were saying, also in Peru, I guess. But in Colombia, you have a very long history of domestic brands, a very sophisticated market, and a very mature market that also is very demanding. So even in our local brands for jeans, for example, it's not you have the demand for premium jeans, but you also have the demand for the local Colombian type of jeans. So you have to know your niche market. You have to know your customer, and you have to take opportunities and try to find those opportunities in the uniqueness and the diversification of the market. So Colombia has opportunities, also have some similarities, and that's where you have to know what your brand is, what is not, and what do you have to look for in order to find your uniqueness and where you should go, because you should not pick the same retailer or the same market for your retail store or your brand just because you want to cover everything. You have to find your right niche, and you have to find what are the opportunities and the uniqueness of that market.
Before we open it to questions from the audience, let me ask you about what advice could each of you give to college students who are about to start a career in the fashion industries in general, but in particular about licensing and fashion publishing and export promotion marketing as well. Karina?
Well, I would say, and something I honestly didn't do, was the internship program. But then again, 20 years ago, when I started my career, they weren't as prevalent as they are today. And I know as a big, let's just say we have a big intern program at PVH, and we see, or even in my department, I've had the same intern 3 semesters in a row. And she keeps coming back. I'm sure she's hoping we hire her, and I hope we can too. But that's it's the best way to really see the inside of a company and really understand, okay, there's so many different areas of the fashion business, and people don't even really know much about licensing. Every time I end up talking to people or a group like this, they're like, wow, I didn't realize it was so diverse, it was so fast-paced, it's so, really never a dull moment. So, and you get to touch all parts of the business. You get to work with product, you get to work with different partners, you get to negotiate deals, you get to, the not so fun part is the financial piece, but that's all part of it. And it's a very, very diverse area within big companies, and the internship programs that I've seen these days are really amazing. I mean, we don't just like make you file our papers. Like, we give them real work, and the people that have come through, I think, have really learned something and realized, wow, when I get out of school, I really know what I want to do. Unlike me, which I graduated school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I would definitely encourage people to find a company that interests you, see if you can get into their internship program. There is, I think, a higher rate from these companies. So, if you really land an internship that you enjoy, just make sure that you communicate to your supervisors, to your teammates, to your HR group that I, had a great experience, and if there are any openings, when I'm ready to graduate, they'll keep you in mind for sure. The other thing I would say is that every experience is a learning opportunity. So whether you're here tonight, or whether you're traveling with your family, or whether you're out shopping in a mall, it's everything you're doing is a learning experience. So you really have to just keep your eyes open and your ears open, and recognize that even things that you're doing in your daily life are learning opportunities to be aware of. And lastly, I would say identify a mentor. I was fortunate enough to come across in my career someone who, certainly didn't volunteer to be my mentor, but became my mentor just by default. It was somebody that I worked with for 14 years, and I probably realized about 5 years in that I really, wanted to model my career after this person. And, it's just a great sounding board, someone that you can really, knock around ideas with, and also just, guide you in your decisions as you move through your, the different stages of your career, because, it's not always crystal clear what your next step is or what it should be. It's sometimes, a little bit fuzzy, and you need someone to kind of nudge you in one direction or another, and having that person there is really helpful.
Well, for fashion publishing, and really I think for anything creative in fashion, I think there's no right or wrong, so it's really about a vision. And I think it's really important, it's fundamental actually, to cultivate that vision. So read everything you can, watch every show possible, but do it as a critical observer, as a member, recognize yourself as a member of this industry. Critique it. criticize it. Say, what would you do different? What you don't like? Your opinion is perfectly valid. It's about a vision, and you need to develop that. It won't happen overnight. It takes time, but it will happen if you keep looking for it, if you keep reading, surrounding yourself by it. Be curious, read everything you can, and read it hard. Give them a hard time. Don't just take things the way they show them to you. I think also there's a great misconception that somehow working in fashion is glamorous because we produce sometimes beautiful things. It's not. Those photo shoots, you're like 5 in the morning with your hair like this. You're not in heels, you're not dressed nicely, you work long hours for not much money, and it's hard. I swear to God, my mother until 3 years ago, I think to this day, doesn't believe I have a real job. She thinks, oh, but why you complain? You look at runways all day. We don't live in the same country, even when I was in Lima, so one day she was visiting and she actually saw me crawl back from the office to my apartment at 1 in the morning with my eyes like this after staring at a screen for 20 hours. And she finally got it. To do a fashion magazine, it takes a lot of work. Anything creative, those things are long, they take time, and especially where you're working in a market like Peru, which is very limited in terms of resources and budgets, you end up doing things that an editor-in-chief would normally, like feeding the models. So it takes work. It's hard work, and it pays off, but you really need to work hard. And I think, lastly, I would say that you also want to take into consideration what goes into doing the creative side of fashion, the numbers behind it, what allows you to do your job, understand the whole picture. The glamour is all very nice, but there are numbers behind it, and there's a purpose for that. So you need to keep an eye on that to be a full professional.
And also going in the same direction, I think this industry has it all. Maybe all the industry says the same, but I think this industry has all the history. It has all the views of the possible businesses that they are, but also the innovation, the creativity, and the possibility to do it all. It has to be technical. You have to be focused. You have to be open-minded and look at everything, but you have to be focused and decide what's your thing, what is not your thing, and focus on that. Because then you become doing everything and not being good at everything, at one thing. In the industry, you can be a good creative person, you can be a good production person, you can be a good trading person. Maybe you need to be part of different parts when you are defining your career. So you have to be open-minded, but focus on who you are, to what you're giving and what you're receiving from the industry. And when you find that, definitely you're going to be successful in what you decide. And I agree with Karina. I have been also blessed by having good mentors and but that's part of also, don't wait for it. You have to work for it. It's directly coming back to you, and depending on the time you dedicate to it, and it is not easy. If you dedicate time in investigating a market, then you will find that market. If you take time finding the right niche, if you are working in your brand, or writing a good paper, or doing a good research, you have to do the due diligence. But in the market you find it, and you have good examples of success and failure. So you also have to choose who you are.
Thank you. I remind you that we are doing this online as well, so when I recognize you, if you're asking a question, wait until you get the microphone so that the online audience hear your question as well. So let's open the floor now. Who has a question? On the back, Bruno.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for being here tonight. I really appreciate your time. My question, I think, specifically for Karina. I came from Brazil in 2006, and I don't remember when I was there seeing, luxury fashion stores. I'm from Salvador in the northeast of Brazil. And now I went back, last year, and I saw like outlet stores. I saw luxury brands in, common malls. And I see that, Brazil, although it has high taxation and ever-changing politics and economy, it's actually cheaper to travel to the United States to travel within Brazil. Like it's cheaper to come to New York, for example, than to just go to São Paulo to get fashion. So my question is, how does the overall economic situation of these countries? I remember 5-10 years ago, Brazil was seen as, an emerging economy, a country that was going and uprising. Now we're talking about it as a country that's not so much as positive. How does the overall economic situation of a country determine the overall fashion situation? And how do you guys stay true to your brand? And, as she was saying, also thinking globally but acting locally, I'm thinking more of like, how are we staying true to the identity of the company while, respecting the markets?
Brazil was a big personal focus for myself. Back in 2012, we actually formed a joint venture partnership with a local company there. So a joint venture is a little bit different than a distribution partnership because you have, I say, skin in the game. You are financial partners and you are strategic partners, but the partner on the ground is the operating company. So right there, you set the foundation for, both companies have a vested interest in, seeing the vision of the brand come to life, and everyone is obligated to see that through our relationships. So to answer your question about the economics of it all, yes, for sure, 5 years ago, it was part of the BRIC countries that everyone identified as, major emerging markets, major GDP growth. In the last year, that's come down tremendously. We are already, let's say, we're in it. There's no turning back. So we have grown exponentially in the last 5 years. We actually have existed in the market for 14 years, but in a very sort of low-key way. When we joined this new partnership, we sort of relaunched the brand. We did a new new retail stores, new distribution, really put a new face to the brand. And actually, I'm traveling there in 2 weeks to open our flagship store, which is really exciting. So to me, that's really the pinnacle of the repositioning of our brand, and really setting the tone to the marketplace and sending the message that, Tommy Hilfiger is an important brand here. And, to Sylvia's point, there's a status, attached to wearing Tommy Hilfiger. The little flag, and I've noticed a couple of people actually are wearing it today, that flag is a status symbol for not just people in Brazil, but all throughout Latin America. And it's super important. So when you talk about thinking globally and acting locally, there are some markets in the United States, you'll find that a lot of our products don't have the flag so prevalent anymore. But when you travel internationally, it has to be on the chest. It can't be hidden on the sleeve. It can't be, on the back of the product. It has to be front and center because that's why people are buying the brand. So, and we also have started into local sourcing. So in Sylvia's world, we have done some local production in Brazil and some other markets in Latin America, again, to really position ourselves to cater to the local market because it's very particular, and I think the other panelists touched on it. It's not one size fits all. You really do have to look at the marketplace there and say, you know what, the jeans I produce for the United States don't necessarily fit the Brazilian consumer. So we, when we say think globally, act locally, we are positioning our brand, from 30,000 feet as a premium fashion but accessible brand, but at the same time, we're also looking down on the granular level to the product to say, okay, we need to make sure we have the right product with the right branding for that consumer. Good answer. Does that answer your question?
1 second, please. Anna?
We have an online question from Stephanie, and it's for anyone on the panel. Which countries in Latin America do you think will have emerging fashion markets in the next 10 years?
No, you can really feel free to jump in. I mean, I think when Patrick identified the markets that have the strongest economies, those are really that really is a good indicator as to where there is a market for fashion products. So when you look at the top five or six markets, you have your Chile, your Brazil, your Mexico, your Colombia, Argentina. These are the countries that are strongest economically, so they make the most sense. The other thing we look at is how developed is the retail landscape. So, in some cases, people operate in malls. Sometimes there are street stores. Some markets have department stores, but not all of them. A market the size of Brazil, you would think that they have department stores like Macy's or Bloomingdale's. They don't have a single one at, let's say, a premium level. They have like the likes of, similar to a Target or something like that. But, so we really try to look at how developed is the retail landscape and where would our products be distributed and, what is the opportunity.
Besides that, I think also what you're looking at is distribution channels down there, as well as logistics and distribution centers. Because not only the possibility of having a market locally, but also having that market being expanded already with retailers that are doing it successfully, as we were speaking before. So if you have Colombia as a hub, for example, for luxury brands or for some certain brands, but also there is a logistics already working for retailing coming from export platform, as we call it. You have already been selling from Colombia to Peru or Colombia to Chile for certain brands. For a new brand or for a new retailers, it's more comfortable to set up their operation there because it's already working.
Let's come back to the live audience in the front here. We need a microphone.
I have a question for Ms. Spar. So you said a lot of the international licensing, branding licensing is done through the distributor centers. What's the major requirements that you look for when you're
Identifying a strategic partner? Financial stability. I think a lot of that is, you really need to pick a company, that has the expertise, of course, but it can't just be that. I mean, they can have all the experience in the world, but if they're not financially stable and financially sound, it becomes a very risky endeavor. So for sure they have to have financial stability, but also, as Sylvia touched on, is, the relationships and the know-how. So everything from having the right distribution centers to having relationships with landlords at the malls to be able to negotiate. It's not so easy to just go and open up a store. There's a lot of things that go into that, and when you're thinking about opening a store, you need to know that that store is going to be profitable if you're going to make the investment. So you need to know that the rent you're negotiating and the overhead that you're planning, that everything makes sense in terms of rolling out one or more retail stores, because normally opening one is a losing proposition. If you're opening several, that's where you really start to gain economies of scale and build a portfolio that can be a profitable undertaking. So you really need someone with the financial ability to scale the business and not just open a single store or have a single point of distribution.
Online questions? No?
There are no other online questions.
At this time. Anybody else in the audience? Wait for the microphone, please.
This is for Sylvia, and I know you're talking about finding your niche market. And I wanted to know if you could give us some maybe specific examples of what the niche market is for Colombia, or some of the aspects of it.
Colombia is a very diverse population, so we can keep hours telling you who we are, because we have a heritage from European. The Spanish were there a long time ago, and then they went out, but we have a leading role from the United States, so we have a combined population. But we have like 3 different stages of customers, and the client in Colombia, you have a luxury market that has grown from Salvatore Ferragamo and the major department stores, luxury brands going there in not only in the capital but also in the coast, to Payless shoes and discount stores in the last 10 years, when the beginning of the open market was there. But I think the growing market is going more in the middle one, because our core customer is more brand oriented, is more sophisticated, and once they have more leverage of income right now to be able to buy, they are making a choice. So right now that they are making the choice, they are choosing between their local identity, keeping some local identity in their income distribution and their income disposal to consume, and having the other brands in that income. The other brands also are part of that identity, and have some percentages of luxury, and the other one is sophisticated. So I would say is not a minimal consumer that is looking for basic production. It's more a sophisticated customer.
Yeah. Hi. This question is for Karina. I'm Professor Jimenez. I teach some of the business law classes here. So we look at licensing a lot from the contractual side. So I have like a couple technical questions.
Sure.
One, a lot of the cases that we look at have disputes that arise due to, for example, disagreement as to what channel you're going to use. And another common area of problems is the termination or the renewal. And you suggested a couple times that you had to look very closely at people's financials and stuff like that. So it gives me the impression that maybe this has come up before, and it also relates to the business aspect of licensing, in that sometimes the license territory has become so attractive to the licensor that you'd like to recapture it and buy it back. Mm-hmm. So could you just address a little bit like the whole issue of deciding whether you want to terminate or whether you want to renew or whether you want to take back the territory?
Sure, and we've definitely done all of those things. When we craft our agreements, we put some very what others may call strict parameters in those agreements to make sure that the distribution is aligned with what we envision for the brand. So typically our agreements allow for account approvals. So anywhere that your partner wants to distribute in, whether it's a regional partner or it's a product licensee, they have to come to us and say, we want to distribute to Macy's, or we want to distribute to Liverpool in Mexico. And if we're saying, you know what, that's not really aligned with our strategic vision, we have different plans or different idea of how we want to be positioned, then it's well within our rights to say, not what we have in mind. But usually, when you're negotiating the agreement and when you're coming to the table with a partner, you're saying, you're discussing up front what your vision is. And if you're not aligned, then typically you won't even make it to execution of a contract. That you really can identify a lot of times that, what, they want to do X with the brand and we want to do Y, they're not the right partner. You really have to be aligned up front on what you're, and then, yes, there's always going to be some nuances and disagreements, but that's all part of the negotiation, and you work through those. When it comes to renewals or terminations, or to your point, buying back a business, I think it really, again, has to do with the strategic vision of the company, but also, looking at it very opportunistically. So where does it make sense for us to take a business back? And where does it make sense? Can we operate it internally? Do we have the core competency and, or if we don't currently have it, can we add it? In a lot of cases, we've acquired entire companies. One of the recent acquisitions for PVH was Warnaco, and that was a pretty historic one in this industry. And they had a core competency in the intimate apparel business and underwear business. As most of you may know, Calvin Klein Underwear, which is a pretty tremendous business worldwide, that was not something that we had previously. And in some cases we have, and still out there, some licenses for those categories. But looking at the future, you have to say, well, now that we have this center of excellence within our organization for that category, does it make sense, where I have a Tommy Hilfiger license for intimate apparel, or I have a license for one of our heritage brands? Does it make sense to, now look at when the contract is up for renewal, to say, you know what, we want to actually take it in-house, because it's something that we now think that we would, not only could we handle, but it would be more profitable to actually run it ourselves than to farm it out to a third party. But in the case of a termination where you simply decide you don't want to go forward with a partner, never easy, very, very difficult. I think the advantage of being PVH is that you're a formidable player in the market. Not a lot of companies that we partner with want to lose their reputation or put their reputation at stake of ending the relationship poorly. So we're in a position of strength where, and it doesn't always happen. You have companies that don't care and will sort of, like say, milk your brand until the agreement is over and distribute in places where they're not supposed to. So you do have those situations, but you just have to manage it, and sometimes it does get into legal disputes. But for the most part, they wind down pretty easily. I think more because of the companies that we partner with are pretty reputable to begin with, and they don't want to ruin their reputation or say, you know what, I may no longer have Tommy Hilfiger, but maybe tomorrow I'm going to get a license with Polo Ralph Lauren or Nautica. But if they have a rumor in the industry that it was sour grapes, then it may not go so well. So and this industry, as big as it is very small. Advice, going back to the advice thing, don't burn your bridges. Because everyone knows everybody.
There is a question for Ximena. Ximena, you mentioned that you are currently in the master's program, Global Fashion Management, here at FIT. Can you tell us a little bit about the transition coming from the workforce for a while and coming back to school, and especially here in New York City and at FIT?
Well, yes, I certainly can. The transition was very, very difficult. Basically, when I started a program, I had been out of college for about 10 years, so going back to the classroom was very disconcerting. You feel that you're not on solid ground. Everything you know is questioned and challenged. And you suddenly feel like you don't know anything, and your experience doesn't account for anything. And it's a good shake-up. It's hard, but it's a good shake-up because it actually makes you question yourself and go back to your experience and what you and your vision tell you, your opinions. You need to go back to trust yourself, because you will have a few months there when you're questioning everything you know. It's really confusing, but then you have to go with it and realize that your gut and your experience are valid and account for something. It's great being in New York. I used to come here a lot for work because, believe it or not, up until a couple of years ago, it was actually cheaper for us to shoot in New York than it was in Lima. We had 3 photographers, and they started to like charge crazy fees because you only had 2 or 3. So I used to come here to a lot of fashion shoots and, well, cover Fashion Week, obviously. And New York was always one of those cities I wanted to spend more time in. So and I was fairly familiar with it by then. So when it was time to decide where, I thought of New York, certainly, to have the experience. And when I thought of New York, FIT was my first choice. I actually wanted to join the program a few years ago, but I was promoted to editor-in-chief, so I decided to postpone it. But after a couple of years on that job and taking out everything I could of it, I decided it was time to continue my education and come here. But it's certainly, grad school is not for the faint of heart. It's really hard. I used to be able to pull 14-hour days of work without a complaint, but when you're studying, it's totally different. It's more exhausting. Your brain, like, it melts. You don't know what you're doing. The nervous breakdowns are legendary. Take corporate finance and you'll start to cry. So, but it's great. It's I think that sometimes what's wrong with this industry is that people get complacent with themselves and stop challenging themselves. And I think that when that happens, you're done. You always need to challenge yourself and keep learning what's new. This industry is ever changing. It will never be static. So there will always be something new to learn.
Thank you. One last question.
I just have a quick question, which is basically, just to use, I guess, a sports analogy in some ways, they have sort of a farm system for a lot of teams, but is there any sort of system in Peru or in Colombia where they start to develop creative talent? You said there's a lack of talent in Peru, there's a lack of talent in Colombia. Is there any sort of system where they start to develop talent there? I know that it's very diverse here in this school and people come from different countries, but many of us don't tend to go back. For instance, I mean, my mom's from Portugal, and I'm never going to show up there. But it's just, is there any incentive? Is there anything going on in those countries to basically ask, come back and work for those companies?
In Colombia, as I say, I think in the case of Colombia, you have a sophisticated market from fashion designers to very big production plants. And the relationship between one and the other also is getting into the university. So that's also important, that the industry is investing in education and the new generation. Because the same discussion that is taking place in the United States among the owners of the plants here and the brands and retailers in the main forums in New York and in the United States, that the industry has to attract the young generation to be in the industry, to be an attractive industry to be in, is something that is happening all over the world. Creativity is there, and it has to go in all the parts of the supply chain. So in the case of Colombia, you have innovation and creativity more related to the production side. Now it's getting, as I'm telling you, to the education, and we were speaking about that with Patrick, for example, getting together the different universities between the FIT, for example, with Colombia. But when the private sector invests in education, the public sector invests in education, and all begin to grow the education also with the industry, not only the business, then you have more opportunities to involve in a long-standing relationship. Innovation is there. Innovation is in the fabric. Innovation is in the product. Innovation is in the creativity of doing a new brand. But to be a long-standing growth, a long path, also it has to be related to education.
Any incubator efforts in Peru?
Not really.
No.
Yeah, we sort of tried to be, but it's really difficult. I mean, there's, I was telling Karina before the panel started that there's the only college program of fashion in Peru opened about a year ago. So it's fairly new for us, the fashion industry being really an industry, being full of professionals and not people who are improvising. It's really new. And we have amazing photographers, great models, great talent, but once they're gone, they're gone. And they're not coming back. I mean, they might for like a week, get their ceviche on, and then they'll go back to London or New York or Paris or wherever they're stationed now. There are no incentives right now, not from the government, and certainly not yet from private institutions. I think it's a great idea, it's something that I would love to develop or play a part into, but as of right now, people who have talent in fashion, they leave and they don't come back. It's really sad.
Christine? Yep. Do we close? Yep, sure. Go ahead. Yep.
So that was quite a discussion, wasn't it? So I'd like to thank, our panel here who gave us new insight into marketing and licensing in Latin America. It's certainly more than we expected. We would like to thank our moderator who really very copiously worked on getting this event, to this standard. I'd like to thank the audience. Actually, I just wanted to mention that Bruno is actually our PVH scholar. And this is why he was so in tune with what Karina was speaking about. But we are very interested. We sent a class over to Brazil, to Panama, to Peru. And certainly Colombia is in our radar screen. And also we are studying, the COIL, which is an online international learning system where we want to partner with colleges abroad. So hopefully we can do some projects or some classes together with other classes and get their reactions. So we hope that this is the start of something big among us. And so thank you so much. Our next event is on November 11, and Professor Jimenez will be the moderator of that one. And it's fair trade head-to-toe dressing. And so we will have Kate Black, who wrote the book. We will actually have a book signing before the book launching. So this is like another exclusive for our program. And then we're planning big things for next semester to continue the celebration of our 20th anniversary. Professor Jimenez is planning a fashion symposium, probably on high-tech or technology wear, or maybe licensing. And then in May, which coincides with World Trade Week month, we hope to host a very big event on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And so we hope to partner with outside companies, and we will hold it at the Katie Murphy Amphitheater, probably on May 2nd. So watch out for that announcement. With that, good night to everyone. Good night to our online audience, the online degree ITM students. And we hope to see you in our next event.